I never thought my grandmother's parting gift would lead to the most ridiculous property dispute of my life, but that's exactly what happened when Phyllis Morton moved in next door. The land survey she'd brushed off as unnecessary red tape had come back to haunt her in the most spectacular way, and now I was standing on my front porch watching her $1 million dream home being built, 6 feet over the property line and directly on top of land that had been in my family for generations. I'm Elliot Caldwell, just your average small-town architect who inherited my grandmother's house after she passed away last year. It wasn't much to look at, a modest 2-bedroom cottage with peeling paint and a yard that needed serious attention, but it was mine, free and clear. The property itself was the real gem. 2 acres of prime real estate in what had recently become one of the fastest-growing neighborhoods in Millfield. My grandmother's final words to me were simple. "Don't sell an inch of that land, Elliot. Not a single inch." At the time, I thought it was just the ramblings of a woman who'd lived through the Great Depression, but now I understood. She knew something I didn't. It all started when Phyllis Morton, the president of the Evergreen Hills Homeowners Association, decided that the empty lot adjacent to mine would make the perfect location for her forever home. Phyllis was the kind of woman who wore pearls to get the mail and had a standing weekly appointment for her ash-blonde hair to be styled into what I could only describe as an architectural feat of hairspray. Her husband, Gerald, was rarely seen and even more rarely heard, a quiet accountant who nodded along to whatever his wife said. "You know, Elliot," she said to me one afternoon, leaning over my fence while I was trying to mow my lawn, "your grandmother's house really brings down the neighborhood aesthetic." I turned off the mower. "Excuse me? Oh, don't take offense. I just mean it needs some TLC. The Homeowners Association has standards, you know." She handed me a thick booklet. "You should familiarize yourself with our guidelines. There's a $500 fine for grass over 3 inches. I stared at the booklet, then at her. "My property isn't part of your HOA, Mrs. Morton." She laughed like I told a charming joke. "Everyone in Evergreen Hills is part of the HOA, dear. Not me. This property was established before your development was even planned. My grandmother never signed any HOA agreement." The smile froze on her face. "Well, that's simply not possible. I'll have to look into that." She walked away with a stiff back, and I had a feeling I'd just made an enemy. 2 days later, a construction crew arrived at the vacant lot next door. I watched with mild interest as they marked off the boundaries and started bringing in equipment. It wasn't until the foundation was being laid that I noticed something odd. They were building awfully close to my property line. I approached a worker during their lunch break. "Hey, are you sure you're building in the right spot? Seems like you're cutting it pretty close to my land." The guy shrugged. "I just follow the plans, buddy. Talk to the owner if you've got concerns." That afternoon, Phyllis appeared at my door with a plate of store-bought cookies and a saccharine smile. "Elliot, I wanted to properly introduce myself as your new neighbor. Isn't it exciting?" I accepted the cookies cautiously. "Your construction crew seems to be building pretty close to my property." "Oh, don't worry about that. We had the land surveyed. Everything is precisely where it should be." She waved a dismissive hand. "Now, about your garden shed, it violates our HOA height restrictions. You'll need to take it down by next Friday." I set the cookies on the table beside me. "Mrs. Morton, as I mentioned before, my property isn't part of your HOA. And I'm concerned about your building site. I'd like to see the survey." Her smile tightened. "I don't have it on me, obviously. And I think you're confused about the HOA situation. I'll have our lawyer send you the paperwork." She turned to leave, then added, "The shed, Elliot. Friday." I closed the door and immediately called a surveyor. Something didn't feel right, and I wasn't about to take Phyllis Morton's word for it. The surveyor, a woman named Zoe Grayson, arrived 2 days later. She had a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated, dressed in practical clothes with her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. "So you're worried about your property line?" she asked, setting up her equipment. "Yeah, the construction next door seems too close. And the owner is difficult." Zoe raised an eyebrow. Phyllis Morton? I've heard stories. She checked something on her tablet. According to county records, your property is 2.1 acres, established in 1952. And you're right, it predates the Evergreen Hills development, and isn't subject to their HOA. I felt a rush of satisfaction. That's what I thought. Let's get this survey done and see where we stand. 3 hours later, we were standing at the edge of my yard, looking at the fresh foundation that had been poured for Phyllis's house. Zoe's expression was grim. Well, Mr. Caldwell, you were right to be concerned. Their foundation extends approximately 6 feet onto your property. And that's not all. The planned driveway would cut across your land by about 12 feet on the east side. I ran a hand through my hair. Are you sure? Absolutely. I've triple-checked. Your grandmother's property deed is clear as day. She handed me a folder. Here's the official survey with my stamp. I'd recommend contacting a real estate attorney. That evening, I tried to speak with Phyllis, but was told by Gerald that she was indisposed. The next day, I called and emailed. No response. Meanwhile, construction continued at a frantic pace. I consulted with an attorney, Diana Ramos, who reviewed the survey and property records. This is pretty straightforward, Mr. Caldwell. They're building on your land without permission. We can file for an immediate injunction to halt construction. And if they've already built? Diana smiled. Then things get interesting. In our state, if someone builds a permanent structure on your land, you have several options. You can demand they remove it, you can charge them rent, or in some cases, you can actually claim ownership of the structure itself. The injunction was filed that afternoon. But when the sheriff went to serve the papers the following day, he found an empty construction site. The workers had been told not to return until further notice. I thought that was the end of it until I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of machinery. Looking out my window, I saw construction lights blazing and a crew working at full speed on Phyllis's house. I immediately called the sheriff, who arrived within 20 minutes. By then, they had already poured more concrete and framed out a significant portion of the first floor. They're violating a court order, I told the sheriff, handing him the paperwork. The site foreman argued that he'd never been served any papers and was just following his client's instructions to work efficiently. The sheriff ordered them to stop until things could be sorted out in court, but the damage was already done. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I installed security cameras around my property and documented everything. Phyllis, for her part, began a whisper campaign among the neighbors, claiming I was trying to extort her and block her dream home out of spite. One evening, I came home to find a violation notice taped to my door, $1,000 fine for an unapproved security installation. I tore it up and threw it away. The morning of the hearing arrived, and I met Diana at the courthouse. Phyllis was there with her attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit. She didn't look at me. Judge Martinez reviewed the evidence and the property survey. Mrs. Morton, can you explain why you proceeded with construction after being served with an injunction? Phyllis's attorney spoke up. Your Honor, my client was never properly served. The papers were left at an empty construction site. We also served them to Mrs. Morton's home address, Diana countered. Which I never received, Phyllis interjected, her voice dripping with indignation. And furthermore, our own survey shows that the construction is entirely within our property lines. May I see this survey? The judge asked. The attorney handed over a document. I couldn't see it from where I sat, but I noticed the judge's expression change as he examined it. Mrs. Morton, this survey is dated 3 days ago. The construction began weeks ago. We had a verbal confirmation before that, her attorney said smoothly. From whom? The previous surveyor, who unfortunately has relocated out of state. The judge looked unimpressed. I'm granting the injunction. All construction must cease immediately until this matter is resolved. And Mrs. Morton, I strongly suggest you work with Mr. Caldwell to come to an agreement, or you may find yourself with a partially built house that you cannot legally complete or occupy. Outside the courthouse, Phyllis finally acknowledged me. You're making a terrible mistake, Elliot. My husband and I have invested our life savings in this home. You built on my land, Phyllis. I tried to tell you before you even broke ground. We can work something out, she said, suddenly conciliatory. What if we purchase that section of your property? Name your price. I remembered my grandmother's words. It's not for sale. Her face hardened. Everyone has a price. You'll regret turning down my generous offer. I didn't know then how far she would go to get her way. The next morning, I woke to find my yard had been torn up overnight, deep tire tracks carved through the grass, and several old oak trees that had stood for decades were cut down. My security cameras had been spray-painted black. I called the sheriff, who came out to take a report. Any proof it was your neighbor? He asked, though we both knew who was responsible. The cameras were disabled, I admitted. Well, without evidence. He shrugged apologetically. That afternoon, I received a certified letter from the Evergreen Hills HOA. It stated that my property had been annexed into their jurisdiction through a county rezoning application filed 3 months earlier. Attached was a list of violations totaling over $7,000 in fines. I immediately called Diana, who looked into the rezoning claim. It's complete fiction, she told me. They filed an application, but it was denied. They're trying to intimidate you. Two could play at this game. I hired a 24-hour security service to watch my property and installed new, hidden cameras. I also filed a formal complaint against Phyllis with the county for harassment. The situation escalated when I came home from work one day to find a building inspector on my property, accompanied by Phyllis. What's going on here? I demanded. The inspector looked uncomfortable. We received a complaint about unsafe structural conditions. Filed by her, I assume? I nodded toward Phyllis, who was wearing a triumphant smile. I'm just concerned for your safety, neighbor, she said sweetly. The inspector found nothing wrong with my house, much to Phyllis's visible disappointment. But as they were leaving, I overheard her say to him, I'm sure we can find something if we look harder next time. Remember, Gerald approved that permit you needed for your daughter's pool. That night, reviewing my security footage, I saw something interesting. At 1 a.m., Phyllis had snuck onto my property and placed something under my porch. I called the sheriff, who sent a deputy out. Together, we discovered a small propane tank with a slow leak, positioned near my furnace vent. This could have caused an explosion, the deputy said gravely. Do you have proof it was Mrs. Morton? I showed him the footage. Clear as day, it showed Phyllis placing the tank and then hurrying away. I'll need a copy of this. We'll be paying Mrs. Morton a visit. Phyllis was arrested that evening on charges of attempted arson and reckless endangerment. She was released on bail the next day, and her attorney issued a statement claiming it was all a misunderstanding. She had found the tank on her property and was merely returning it to its rightful owner. The criminal case would take time to proceed, but I had more immediate concerns. Construction on Phyllis's house had stopped as ordered, but the partially built structure still stood on my land. Diana advised me that we had a strong case for either having it removed or claiming ownership. Given that she's now facing criminal charges related to this dispute, the court will likely be unsympathetic to her position, Diana explained. We should press our advantage. We filed a motion requesting that the court grant me ownership of the partial structure based on the deliberate and knowing encroachment on my land, combined with Phyllis's subsequent criminal behavior. The hearing was set for the following month. In the meantime, Phyllis was forbidden from contacting me or coming near my property. Her husband Gerald, who had remained in the background until now, reached out to propose a settlement. Phyllis isn't thinking clearly, he told me over coffee at a local diner. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. She's become obsessed with this house. I had no idea she was cutting corners on the survey or that she would. He trailed off. Try to blow up my house. I finished for him. He winced. I'm so sorry. I should have paid more attention. The thing is, we've put everything into this house, our savings, a second mortgage on our current home. If we lose it all, we'll be ruined. You should have thought of that before building on someone else's land. I know. He rubbed his face. What if we buy that portion of your land? Fair market value plus compensation for the trouble? I considered it. My grandmother made me promise not to sell any of the land. Why was it so important to her? I shook my head. I don't know. She just made me promise. Gerald looked defeated. I understand. But please think about it. Phyllis made a terrible mistake, but this will destroy us financially. As he left, I couldn't help feeling a twinge of sympathy, not for Phyllis, but for Gerald, who seemed to be collateral damage in his wife's schemes. That evening, I found myself going through my grandmother's old papers, looking for any clue about why the land was so important to her. In a faded folder, I found something interesting, an environmental survey from 1985. According to the document, there was a significant aquifer running beneath the property, with particularly easy access on the eastern section, exactly where Phyllis was building her house. I called Zoe, the surveyor, to ask if she knew anything about it. An aquifer? Let me check some geological surveys. She called back an hour later, excited. Your grandmother was sitting on a gold mine, Elliot. That aquifer is one of the purest water sources in the county. With water rights becoming increasingly valuable in this region, that land could be worth a fortune to the right buyer. Like a water bottling company? Exactly. Or for agricultural use. Either way, it explains why your grandmother was so adamant about keeping the land intact. The next day, I received an unexpected visitor, Vivian Harris, the vice president of the Evergreen Hills HOA. She was a tall woman with a perpetually worried expression. I need to tell you something, she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder, as if afraid of being seen. Phyllis knew about the aquifer. That's why she wanted that specific lot so badly. How would she know about it? Her cousin works for the County Water Authority. He told her about it over a year ago, and she's been plotting to get control of it ever since. The original plan was to pressure you to sell your entire property, but when that didn't work, she decided to at least get the part with the aquifer access. Why are you telling me this? Vivian looked uncomfortable. Because she's been embezzling from the HOA funds to finance her house. Over $200,000 is missing. The board is conducting an audit, but she doesn't know yet. I thought you should know what kind of person you're dealing with. This changed everything. I called Diana and filled her in on what I'd learned. She agreed that we should amend our court filing to include this new information. The day of the hearing arrived. Phyllis appeared with a new attorney, looking confident despite the pending criminal charges against her. Gerald sat behind her, his expression unreadable. Judge Martinez reviewed the amended filings. Mrs. Morton, these are serious allegations. Before we proceed, I should inform you that the district attorney has submitted a request to include these new allegations in their criminal investigation. Phyllis's attorney whispered something to her, and she nodded. Your Honor, my client would like to propose a settlement. I'm listening, the judge said. Mrs. Morton will abandon all claims to the structure and the land it occupies, and will pay Mr. Caldwell $50,000 in damages. In return, Mr. Caldwell will not pursue further civil claims against her. Diana looked at me questioningly. I shook my head. Your Honor, Diana said, we reject the offer. Given the deliberate nature of the encroachment, and Mrs. Morton's subsequent actions, we are asking the court to grant Mr. Caldwell ownership of the partial structure as it stands, as well as damages for the harassment and attempted arson. The judge considered this. I'm inclined to agree with Mr. Caldwell. Mrs. Morton, you built on his land despite being warned, continued construction after a court order to stop, and then engaged in a campaign of harassment that escalated to potentially deadly actions. I'm granting Mr. Caldwell's request for ownership of the structure. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay $150,000 in damages. Phyllis gasped. Her attorney immediately began arguing for a reduction in damages, but the judge was unmoved. Additionally, Judge Martinez continued, I'm referring the allegations of HOA fund embezzlement to the district attorney's office for investigation. Court is adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Gerald approached me. Elliot, please. We can't afford those damages. Isn't getting the house enough? Before I could answer, Phyllis stormed over. This isn't over. That house is mine. I put everything into it. Including money stolen from your neighbors, apparently, I replied. Her face went white. Who told you that? It's a lie. The audit says otherwise, Gerald said quietly. I've seen the numbers, Phyllis. What have you done? She turned on him. You weak, pathetic man. Do you think I could count on you to secure our future? I did what I had to do. A court officer approached. Ma'am, I need to ask you to lower your voice or step outside. Phyllis glared at me. You'll regret this. That house is mine. She stalked away, leaving Gerald standing there looking shell-shocked. I'm sorry, he said again, before following his wife. 3 weeks later, the full story came out. Phyllis had indeed embezzled over $200,000 from the HOA funds, using fake invoices for neighborhood improvements that never happened. She had also bribed the original surveyor to falsify the property lines and had known from the beginning that she was building on my land. Her plan had been to establish the house and then force me to sell her the land beneath it, using HOA pressure and harassment to make my life miserable, until I gave in. The aquifer was the real prize. Her cousin at the Water Authority had tipped her off about a major development plan for the adjacent county that would need water rights. The value of the aquifer would skyrocket once that development was announced. Phyllis was arrested again, this time for embezzlement and fraud, in addition to the earlier charges. She was denied bail as a flight risk after investigators discovered she had purchased one-way tickets to the Cayman Islands. Gerald filed for divorce and cooperated with the authorities. He approached me one last time before moving away to start over. What will you do with the house? He asked, nodding toward the half-built structure that now legally belonged to me. I looked at it thoughtfully. I'm going to finish it. My grandmother would have liked that, keeping the land and making something good out of this mess. It was going to be beautiful, he said wistfully. Phyllis may be a criminal, but she had good taste in architecture. I smiled. I'm an architect, actually. I might make a few modifications. In the end, I hired a contractor to complete the house, incorporating my own designs and ensuring it was built to last. The aquifer remained untouched, my grandmother's legacy preserved for future generations. The Evergreen Hills HOA elected a new president who respected my property's independence, and the neighborhood found a more collaborative approach to maintaining standards. As for Phyllis, she was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to 8 years in prison. The court ordered restitution to the HOA and to me, though it was unlikely she'd ever be able to pay it all. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of what was now my guest house, looking out over the property my grandmother had fought to keep intact. The original cottage still stood, renovated but maintaining its character. The new house, positioned to maximize the view without disturbing the land's natural features, would eventually become my main residence. Zoe, the surveyor who had helped expose the truth, joined me on the porch. Our professional relationship had evolved into something more over the months of working together to document the property properly. Your grandmother would be proud, she said, slipping her hand into mine. You kept your promise. And gained a house in the process, I added with a laugh. Not how I planned to expand, but I can't complain about the outcome. Do you ever hear from Gerald? Christmas card last year. He's living in Colorado now, starting over. Seems happier. We watched the sunset over the property that had been the center of so much drama. 2 houses, 1 plot of land, and beneath it all, the aquifer flowing silently, protected for whatever the future might hold. My grandmother always said that land was the one thing they couldn't make more of. She was right about that, and right to make me promise to protect it. What she couldn't have foreseen was that keeping that promise would not only preserve her legacy but would also lead me to a new home, a new beginning, and the peace of knowing that sometimes justice does prevail, even against the most determined HOA president with dreams of grandeur built on stolen land.